and which, like compound, like CH, whether it was a short. You have one. Okay. Uh, I have one that I just got from Tim Jane. His sister gave me Tim's Bible. And it was one of those, I call it self-pronouncing. Am I using the right term? It shows you how to pronounce all of the names of people, names of places. And as I've gone through and reading, and I mentioned that I've recorded over 700 chapters in there, and some are fairly easy. We always used to kind of chuckle when we have someone read Romans chapter 16 because it has the names where Paul's giving all these names. I want you to look after this person. I want you to thank this person, and this person says hello, and they're real tongue twisters, but nothing like these names and places in the Old Testament. So it's been a real challenge. I record it on a program. I can't even remember the name of the program now. Mark, what's the name of that program that you record on? That you can record audio on? Audacity. It's a free program. And so when you get tongue-tied in that, you just stop, erase the part that you don't want, and then just continue on from there. And some chapters, it looks like that patchwork quilt that Jan was talking about, when you look at how they're all patched together. But it all sounds like you're reading fluently, even though you've had to start and stop 15 or 20 times on some of those. So, but it's been a joy to read and to record those and to put them together. It's fun. I think in terms of church being fun. Now, that's not a good word for some people when they think of church as being fun. I'm not talking funny. I'm talking fun, enjoyable, the desire to really learn. If you don't know already, I really like to go in and dig around, and as I go through every year I go through and read the Bible. And each year I challenge myself with a different aspect of what I want to gain when I read through it. So it takes some planning. It's a process, and my Bible becomes a repository. As full as the Word of God is, it becomes a repository of research. And I've told you at different times how I like to color code things, not only highlight, which takes special pens and special highlighters, because many of the pens and highlighters, and I know that I'm going somewhere with this, and some of you may do this already. Land the plane, as my daughter says, land the plane. And when you go through and you use highlighters and underliners, you can't use just a regular ink pen. And don't use a pencil, because pencils, you think, well, it's dark. It will wear off the more you use the Bible. Have any of you found that to be true? If you use a regular pen, it has acid in it that goes right through the paper. And your regular highlighters, your yellow and your pink and your blue, if you don't use special ones, they bleed right through the page. I've known people that their entire Bible is just yellow from cover to cover. Oh, this looks like a good passage, and I'm not putting them down for that, but they'll highlight this page, they turn the page, guess what? It bled through all the way to the other side. So there's a process, and so this year was the recording of it, making audio recordings of the Bible. And if you read this week's article in the bulletin, that's where I'm going with all of this, is that, and Greg Nienhaus can tell you that the official language of Ghana it's English. It's English, and within the culture of Ghana, how many dialects are there? 70? Yeah. So there's all their different, and I call it Tree, but it's Twi is one of the main dialects of it. So they speak their own dialects for the most part, but English is the main dialect. And Greg and I were fortunate that we got to go to the U.S. Embassy, and we were part of a meeting, and they said, when we speak, remember to use the Queen's English, which we think of the Queen's English because at one time Ghana was a kingdom how do I use that term? They were under English rule. The colony, yes, there's the term I wanted. Big word, colony. And when they gained their independence, I believe in 1959, they still held on to English, but they have all of their different dialects. So when people want to learn English, dialects of the African languages, there's all different ones. And so in the process of learning English, the most efficient way of teaching English around the world isn't to buy grammar books that are made by whatever these companies are. It is using the Bible. And people have done this in China, and China has sanctioned this. You think, China, one of the most godless nations in the world. But they had people come over because China wants to learn English. Why would China want to learn English? Does anybody want to volunteer this? They want to take over the country? Okay, I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, that may be an ulterior motive, but by and large, why would China want to learn English? Trading partners. We are their largest trading partner. So when they are inviting people to go over, and I know that it sounds like I'm not landing that plane, I've just taken off again, but remember that they want to learn English. And the way to learn English, the most efficient way, is to use the Bible. Taught English to people there. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the world, no matter what language you want to translate it from, the most efficient is to use the Bible. And the Chinese, surprisingly enough, said, yes, come and teach us English, whatever method you want to use. And we had a couple that were at the children's home in Valparaiso, and they had spent a year teaching English to the Chinese, using the Bible. And we think, how does that work? Well, I've heard this saying, God works in mysterious ways. Have you heard that before? Yes, and so it's one of the most efficient. Women? Yes, and it's nothing new. They have been doing this for a very long time. Now, if you had to teach English the way I speak English, you know me well enough that they would think, now who taught you? Did Matthew French teach you English? Because none of your pronouns seem to match. And then run-on sentences? Forget about it. So I just wanted to put in the plug for the audio Bible, and they are, now that I've gotten far enough into the program, you can find the entire books. You can find the Gospel of Matthew all in one sitting rather than doing the individual days. The individual days, you'll get Matthew chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1, and Psalm 1 on January 1st. And so as we go each day, there's 3 or 4 chapters that you will read. And by the end of the year, we'll have covered the whole Bible and then some. But if you want the compilations, they are in there as well. And I believe up to, as of today, we're up to Colossians. Colossians are there. And so probably by the end of the day, because you can only download, or upload, I should say, so many uploads a day in YouTube. Sometimes you can get away with uploading 20. Sometimes you'll hit your limit at 10. But these are massive files when you look at it. They are many, many hundreds of megabytes. But it's free. It's absolutely free. So being able to use that. So if you want to listen to the Bible, you're stuck with my voice. There's no way around it. You're stuck with my voice. But these will all be the compilation of each book separately will all be available. I would say probably, this is May 1st. I would say by the end of June they'll be all available in their compilation that way. So the way that you find it, it's easier to find them on YouTube than it is Facebook, because Facebook you really have to go back and back and back in the archives. But remember, when you go to YouTube, click on that round circle. Once you click on the round circle, then it only displays the things that have been uploaded from the Traverse City Church of Christ in that. What he said? So far, people have listened to my YouTube videos for 500 hours. And I'd say I probably have uploaded 800 videos, combination of devotionals, daily devotionals, and classes, different themes. So there's a lot of them out there, and I just cannot thank Mark Johnson enough for really just so painstakingly working with me in all the questions that I have and saying this is how you got to do it. And it's taken a lot, and I hopefully I'm better today than I was 2 years ago when we started. And Greg was here when we were doing some of the first ones, and I had to actually record newer versions of those because they were amateurish, to say the least. Pardon me? Yeah, well, yeah, we'll be merchandisers. So but it's all free, and that is the beauty of this, is that it is free to be able to do such things such as this. I'm not saying that we're competing with the World Video Bible School or anything else, but in our own way, we'll be able to take the Bible out to the world. Also mention that we are putting together a commercial, and as it happened, Linda Frankholm says, "Hey, have you thought about radio?" And I've thought a lot about radio, but I actually have a face for radio, if you know what I mean. But we were putting together a television commercial, and with Linda's help, we may do a radio commercial as well for the congregations in northern Michigan. That only took 15 minutes. Just to see if anybody would volunteer to read those names in Chronicles. Yes, I was going to land the plane there somewhere.
I could read the last verse. These were the chief enemies.
See how easy that was? Yes. Okay. Last week we're looking at the stone, and we'll finish up that in the few minutes that we have. Let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. We began talking about Jesus as that stone from Daniel chapter 2, that stone was going to hit that mountain and it was going to destroy all of those other kingdoms. And that kingdom, talking about the church, was going to be established in the days of those kings. And those kings, of course, is talking about the Roman Empire. And as we look at those, not beginning with Julius Caesar, because technically Julius Caesar was not an emperor. He was the emperors begin with Augustus. 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 4. Julius was what's the term I want to use? He was a dictator, yes. As he crossed the Rubicon, and not that he walked in front of the Jeep Rubicon, but as he crossed the Rubicon, he took over as the dictator over that. It wasn't until Augustus came along in 27 BC, and became 14. When did Augustus? But anyways, he was technically the first, which comes into play when you study the book of Revelation as they talk about those leaders. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. As you come to him being Jesus, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, "Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame." So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. So this, all the things, and we could study these 5 verses for a long, long time, going back to Daniel chapter 2, and we could go to Isaiah and Zechariah. And this passage that is quoted from the Old Testament is quoted several times in the New Testament because it pertains to that stone that was rejected. And when it talks about that stone was rejected, who rejected who? Whom rejected who? Which one is that? Who rejected who here? Israel rejected Jesus. There was a stone that the builders rejected. And we talked a little bit last week about the fact that when you set the cornerstone, if the cornerstone is not absolutely perfect when it's set, then the rest of the building will not be plumb, square, and level in that sense. And based on those 3, when something is plumb, square, and level, you know that it is perfect. If one of those is off, you can be plumb and square, but you may not be level because you might be. I think the Greek word is cattywampers. Cattywampum, cattywamper, cattywampus. Okay, I did take Latin when I was in high school. So it says that the living stone rejected by men, that's Christ, rejected by men, of course, they rejected him and he was crucified. But in the sight of God, chosen and precious. And when was Christ chosen? Before the foundation of the world. Titus chapter 1, verse 2, Ephesians 1, chapter 4 talks about, and Paul talks about this in his letter to the Corinthians as well, is before the foundation of the world, he was chosen that he was going to do this. And now it talks about, for you and I, you yourselves like living stones. Living stones. Anybody have a grasp of what it means to be a living stone? And why would that term living stone be used in the context of this? Not dead. You and I are not dead. We are living stones. So he's making that, and in the context of this, there are architectural terms that are used in the Greek to describe this. So as it talks about like living stones being built up as a spiritual house, it's not talking about the temple in Jerusalem. It's no longer talking about that. But it's talking about you and I that are built up at the church is the temple, and we are part of the temple. I am not the temple. I am a part of the temple, if that makes sense to us. Because we are living stones, and living stones, anybody built, I think I asked last week, has anybody built a stone wall? There's a lot of work that's involved in it. And we're fortunate that we have the practical application as we drive through northern Michigan, because we're sit on that glacial moraine. As the glaciers were receding, they left all of this sand, and they left all of this silt, and they left all of these piles of gravel as they were receding, as everything melted. As a result, that's what we have a lot of houses that are made out of here in northern Michigan, made out of stone. So we have that, we can see it. Much more so than if we lived in the desert. We wouldn't have access to those stones. But he says, you are living stones being built up as a spiritual house to be, and now it makes a transition into another term, a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now they've taken that whole idea of the old law, which was a shadow, and is the shadow a reality? No. What is a shadow? Yeah, a shadow, I always forget to bring a flashlight, but if I showed this, the light against here, and I look behind here, I see a shadow. Well, that's not the flower. It's simply that which is cast from the light reflecting off this. This is the reality. That shadow is not the reality. So the Old Testament, in all of its, especially the law, in all of its glory that the Jews were so beholden to, And even after the church was established, you go through the book of Acts, and they'll use a term, I think we've sort of anglicized it and called it the Judaizers, those who wanted to apply the law of Moses to the church, in which they said, no, in order for you people, you Gentiles, and I'm going to say Gentiles, probably most of us here are Gentiles. Would that be a fair assumption? A Gentile is not a Jew, okay? So for us who are Gentiles, they say, no, you need to observe the law of Moses. And for the males, that meant circumcision. But now, we're being told here, you're being built up as a spiritual house, not the temple anymore. And that would be important to know because Peter writes his letter, 1 Peter, somewhere in the 60 to 65 AD. It may have been as late as 68, but the idea being that he would have written this before the destruction of the temple. And imagine what people thought when they heard that Titus has surrounded in 70 AD. They laid siege around 68 AD, and they laid siege to Jerusalem, they took it, and then they destroyed all of Jerusalem and the temple. Imagine if they had not written letters like this in the book of Romans and the book of Hebrews, that what they would have thought. They have destroyed the temple. They've destroyed what we identify with. Yeah, absolutely. And the idea is the same, that there are different parts that are going to make up this building. And the fact that Peter uses this term, that you're living stones, and we're going to be a holy priesthood. And had these not been written for us to sort of give us the idea, imagine what people would have thought. Why, they've destroyed Jerusalem. We're dead in the water, as it were. But the writers in the New Testament, and especially Christ, were talking about this end of the law that was going to come. But we're a holy priesthood. And think in terms of, how many of you wake up and say, here I am, a holy part of the holy priesthood. What am I going to do today as part of the priesthood? Anybody think in terms like that every day? I don't either. When I think of the priesthood, I think of all the pomp and circumstance that goes along with it. I have to wear a certain vestment in that. But it has nothing to do with the clothes that they wear, but he says you're being, as a spiritual house, the holy priesthood, making reference to what they would have understood about the temple, about those who serve in the temple, the holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. I'm not a priest, according to the Levitical priesthood. So how am I going to offer spiritual sacrifices? Notice the term used together there, spiritual sacrifices, not physical sacrifices. Because if it was physical sacrifices, you know that the first time that they put the knife to the lamb's throat and that blood comes out, I'm out of here. All that blood, not going to work with me. But he says, no. You're going to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Give me an example of a spiritual sacrifice that we would make. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just not going to work. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the end of my being a fisherman. I'll tell you that. Oy. Yeah, and so
That's a good question, though, is when a person does it, mixes the two, you gotta ask, when's the last time you offered a sacrifice at the temple that was authorized by the high priest? I mean, that's what they had to do. Not available now.
yeah, the types and antitypes, and I think at the end of Romans chapter 12 verse 1, which says, I think some versions say, which is your reasonable service. It's your reasonable service. So we talk about what it would mean to have to offer spiritual sacrifices.
I say it's anything you do to glorify God.
Okay, a reasonable sacrifice might be our prayer life. Paul will talk about in Ephesians. We'll talk about that each person has gifts. He says so. Some have been given to be preachers, and some to be teachers, some to be pastors and teachers, and then there are people who have been given the gift as far as being administrators. Might be they're good at handling money, might be good at being able to organize things. So we talk about things that are reasonable, or are to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So the things that we do every day, a reasonable sacrifice might be teaching. A reasonable sacrifice, spiritual sacrifice, anything to do with the kingdom. Yes, Diane. In Romans 12? Yeah, some versions say it's your reasonable service. So, yeah. So, yeah, and that works too. So as we look at this about that holy priesthood, and so there's that transition of thinking. If you go to the book of Revelation, it talks about that He has made us a kingdom of priests. And understanding, if you go back to the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, in some sense, probably more so dealing in Leviticus, is they would talk about all of the things that the Levites would have to do. Because all priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. So that Venn diagram within that, of the things that they had to do. Now, when you get into the book of Joshua, you find the Gibeonites had tricked Israel by saying, we've come from a long distance. Remember that? Remember the story? We've come from a long distance. When we baked this bread, it was fresh. These wineskins were new when we left, and now the bread's moldy and the wineskins are cracked. They were just right over the hill, but they knew that Israel was going to slaughter them. So they made this deal, and when Israel found out about it, they said, "How dare you lie to us?" He says, "But you were going to kill us." So the only thing we could do is plead for ourselves. As a result, they made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers, which was one of the things that the Levites would have had to have done, and they had done for all the time that they were coming out of through the wilderness, the 40 years there, and the 4 or 5 years until the Gibeonites made that. So they were woodcutters and water carriers, and when you think about the rivers of blood and the mountains of skins that had to be taken outside the camp and burned, everything that the Levites had to do. So this holy priesthood, the priests had the job. The high priest had the big job, and then you had all the priests that did it also. And remember, there were 24 orders of the priests that went every 2 weeks to do their part, of which Zechariah in the New Testament, that's what he was doing in there. He was in part of his 2-week duty. So there was a lot of work that had to be done. So it wasn't just only making sacrifices, but it was everything that you had to do. Somebody had to polish all of that utensils in the temple. And so that all of these things that had to be done. Now you think about everything that has to be done of being our spiritual sacrifices, from the smallest things that have to be done to the largest. Everything has to be done, those are our spiritual sacrifices. Yes, read it. Yes, it is a fascinating study. Who was the teacher who reenacted the Passover at Bristol Road? Terry Blake. I remember going to, he was the high priest, and he reenacted the Passover meal there. Yeah, and it was very interesting, and it really was an eye opener in that. And it does in reading through the Torah, the first 5 books, especially when you get to Exodus, as they describe everything that is in the temple and all the utensils and what they had to do. It's a long read, and it can be a tedious read, but also one that is a real eye-opener when you come to passages like this in 1 Peter, or it talks about Romans chapter 12, or you go to Ephesians. It's an eye-opener to spiritual ramifications of what used to be the physical part of worship, and now has all been translated to the spiritual aspect. Yes, absolutely, and a good point to be made as you talk about the old law and everything that, and when you would bring up a child and the all of the children would go to the school and they'd be taught in their under a rabbi, and then only the best of those would move on to the next school, which we might relate to intermediate school. But only the best of those would move on to high school, and only the very, very smallest number of those who graduated from high school would be qualified to follow the rabbi. And they would be so fortunate. But they would have to be the smartest of the smartest of the smartest of the smartest. And here, you and I, imagine how jealous that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the priests were, that suddenly this new thing called the way, and it's used 3 or 4 times in the book of Acts, and it's a capital W, so you know what they're talking about the church. It's this, what do you mean, you guys get to be priests? I studied for all of this time to get to where I am, and you have just been ushered in, and you get all of those blessings. And people say, that's exactly right. It's no longer all of this that you had under compulsion to do. Now it's something that you really love to do, and you get all of the blessings. And that parting veil, that partition that separated everybody else that only once a year the high priest could go into, that was parted. Not so you and I could go up to that temple, but so that Christ could go there. And as our high priest, now he makes intercession for us. And we have all of those blessings for it. It's an incredible study to consider everything that is implied just within this passage that Peter talks about. So the honor is for you who believe. The honor. Sometimes when I think about it, and Kenny Shug left, but he was talking about that sometimes when he comes up here and he stands behind this, he says sometimes he gets a lump in his throat because he realizes what his task is and who he is speaking to. Speaking to the church as a teacher, especially at the table, and I get the same thought sometimes that it has been given to me the unbelievable task, not that I feel worthy of it, but that's the task I have been given. And when you read in the book of James, it says, not many of you should think yourselves to be teachers. Why? Because of the big pay? The great retirement? Because you will be judged more harshly. And I think, well, I never think that's unfair. I think that it is fair. And it's more than fair because of the unbelievable responsibility that's put on it and what you must do to prepare for that. And think, no, I'm just going to phone this one in. I'm going to take the easy one. No, you can't, because you'll be judged more harshly. Is that the fourth or fifth bell? Okay. So, go home and look on YouTube and